And she said, aren't you supposed to provide for me? Shouldn't you give me dowry? He said, you are ignorant. You don't know nothing about Islam. She called me about 2 months ago. She said, he convinced my family to borrow $25,000 from the bank so he can start a project of his own, and he took the money and disappeared. They don't know where he is. And her family is in debt big time because of him. What are they going to say about Muslims? They are thieves and liars. Just because of this guy. And if this lady leaves Islam, I'm not going to be surprised. Because of all the damage and all the harm that he caused for this lady and her family. And of course, as I said before, some people like to do that da'wah, but they don't have the ability. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the English or the style. Or they have the ability, but they don't have the desire. They don't want to work in the field of da'wah and whatever. Da'wah is an individual effort, as I said. Dua are not supported by big organizations. The impact of 911 that pushed da'wah like 200 years back. Okay. Media portrayals, they always portray Muslims as bad people. This is what they see in the media all the time. And the stereotypes. Back in the 1950s and 60s, we have about 3 minutes, inshallah. Back in the 90s and 50s, if you watch the movies back then, Muslims are what I like to call the Alibaba Muslims or the Alauddin Muslims. So all they saw back then, in the 1950s and 60s, flying carpets, magic lamps, belly dancers, genies, all that stuff. So this is what they knew about Muslims back then. From the 1960s till today, the dominant image is the terrorists, the bad Muslims, okay? Especially the Palestinians. Hundreds of movies show Palestinians as terrorists, all the time. Yeah. Some people who live in the West, by watching the media all the time, so this is what their perception about Islam. So they got a shoe in their head. So every time they think about Muslims, they think about something bad. This is the last slide for tonight. Muslims are not the only people who have been stereotyped. African Americans have been stereotypes for so many years. Hundreds of years. The Jews. Until the 1970s and the 80s in Alabama, the word Jew was an insult. Okay, this shows you that the Jews also suffered from media portrayals around World War II and after. But it used collective effort to change the image. If you say one word about a Jew in the media, you're going to jail. Why? Because they got together, they are united, they have some laws, legislations in the United Nations. If you criticize the Jews, or if you say that the number of people who were killed in the Holocaust is not 6 million, no, there are 5,900,999. So you say that, no, there's one guy that you added to the list, you're going to jail. Of course, Native Indians, the Chinese, and so on and so forth. Of course, they call Barack Obama is a Muslim. Why? Because his middle name is Hussein. Okay, it's like Saddam Hussein. Barack is like Mubarak. And Obama, it has a bomb in it. Bomb. So he has to be a Muslim. Okay? So the good news is that these the stereotypes about Muslims are not going to be the bad people forever. So every 15, 20 years, someone assumes the role of the bad person. In the 1940s, around World War II, the bad people were the Nazis and the fascists in Germany, in Japan, and Italy. 20 years later, the Vietnamese. 20 years later, the communists and the Russians. 20 years later, the Muslims, maybe 20 years later, the Chinese or the Canadians. It has to be someone else all the time. So this is the good news that the image will change one day. The bad news is we don't know when. So how to get there, how to change the image? It It's a collective effort and individual duty. All of us have to work together. We need to train some of you to work in the field of da'wah to help us in the masjid and outside. And we'll see you inshallah next Monday. Jazakumullah khair. Go home.